we all have learned that water has three phases: solid, liquid, and vapor. But, more than 100 years ago, there was a colloid chemist, Sir William Hardy, who said something is wrong. Three phases. There are so many anomalies of water. Anomalies meaning observations that don't fit the pattern of three phases. You can't explain them with three phases. And he suggested about 105 years ago, he was a prominent physical chemist, he said there's got to be a fourth phase of water. So we're talking now about something that was predicted 100 years ago. And we discovered something that we think is a fourth phase of water.
You did it, yes.
Well, we did it by hook or by crook or somehow. At first, we saw what we call exclusion zone. We took some hydrophilic material, and we put this material in a suspension of, aqueous suspension of microspheres. And so we immersed like a gel, for example. We put the gel in the water, and when we looked in the microscope, we saw that all of the particles that were in the water, microspheres, moved away and leaving a zone, which we call exclusion zone, because it excluded all the particles. And it was stable, and it was huge by molecular standards. It was something like several hundred micrometers. And we had some idea what it might be, because I had read the works of Gilbert Ling, who talked about a kind of structured water. And I thought it probably is something like that, but the number of molecular layers in 200 micrometers or so, we're talking more than 1 million molecular layers. So it would be an extraordinary extent of order. And so we were a little bit skeptical. We did many experiments, and we found that this indeed was a different phase of water. It's an ordered phase. It's built of sheets, and each sheet has a hexagonal kind of motif. And the sheets stack on one another. So you have many sheets that which build out to a big distance. And there are a couple of interesting properties. The first is that while water itself is neutral, this is negatively charged, typically. Okay. And the region beyond, all these stacked layers is positively charged. And the reason for that is, in order to build these layers, what happens is that water molecules have to break somehow. And the water molecule is built of H plus, OH minus. So it's natural that it's going to, one could conceive that it's going to split into OH minus and H plus. And we found the OH minuses basically build these negatively charged layers. And meanwhile, the H pluses get cast off, and they're in the region that is beyond these layers. So it's like a battery, where this is negatively charged, and then it's positive. And you can actually get energy.
Yes.
And we found that we can actually use this energy to light a light bulb, for example.
So that's why we are also batteries. Because if we are water...
Well, I mean, this is a good point, and I think it's an extremely important point. The question is, where do we get our energy? And so at least some of our energy, I think, comes from this battery. The battery, this separation of charge. Charge is really important and basic, and it's used in the bodily processes. So this kind of easy water, exclusion zone, easy water, fourth phase water, because it has potential energy, it has charge, therefore potential energy, and this potential energy, we found, is used in bodily processes. So if you think about where our energy comes from, so of course part of it comes from food. We get energy from food.
But what about, could we live without food? Could we just live from light, maybe?
Well, yeah. I mean, that there are people in the world who don't eat.
I'm writing about it.
Oh, you're writing about it. Yeah. So this fellow from India is the extreme example. I think his name is Jain, or I don't remember his name, but I know the doctor who examined him.
Is this guy on the sadhu or the monk that was 87 years?
Yeah, that's the guy.
He didn't drink or eat.
He didn't drink, but it's very humid there, so you can imagine, like certain plants that have no roots. They survive pretty well on copper wires and such. You can tap the moisture from the environment, but no eating. He claims he hasn't eaten at the time
Since
he reported.
He was 7.
75 years. And Of course, nobody can prove it because this man lives in a
Yeah.
cave in the jungle somewhere. But they did tests on him in the hospital. They put him in the hospital. So you remember, they put him in for, I think, 10 days or 2 weeks or something. And they had a whole group of physicians, urologists, the cardiologists, the every ologist you can think of. They had a group of 15 people. And these 15 people were certified by dignitaries from the city who said, these guys are for real. This is no scam or anything. And they measured whatever they can measure physiologically. And what they found is that he's normal. He didn't pee at all, but his bladder would expand and then contract back again.
Even if it's
expand.
empty?
Yeah, empty. So it was remarkable. Everything else about the guy seemed to be normal, except that he didn't eat anything guaranteed for the 10 days that he was in the hospital. And then, so the fellow who was the chief physician, he told me the story. He said, you know, the guy was put in the hospital room, and everything was monitored. It was sealed. There was not one opportunity for him to get any food or even any water, except that he needed a bath. So he kind of immersed himself in water, and it's possible that a few drops somehow got to his lips or something. But basically, he didn't drink and didn't eat. So when this was over, he invited him to come to his office afterward to debrief, you know, and his office was quite a few flights up the stairs. Yeah. And this guy was running up the stairs faster than the doctor could follow him. Yeah. So it's pretty, and this is after 10 days or 2 weeks of no nourishment at all. So you asked the question, you know, where does this energy come from?
Yeah, because it may be from the light.
I think it's from the light, because we found that this easy water and the separation of charge, this is built from light, particularly infrared light. It's not visible light, although visible light in our experiments has some effect, but infrared light has an extremely powerful effect. A very modest amount of infrared light could build this exclusion zone by, for example, up to a factor of 5 or 10 times.
So the blue light cannot do it?
No, blue light can't do it.
Only the infrared.
Yeah, so, right. And ultraviolet light didn't do it at all. Visible light, depending on the wavelength, little bit. But then when you get to the infrared, especially at 3 micrometer wavelength, this a little bit of light has an enormous impact.
So you think the light can make the hormonal glands secrete some things that you can live from, maybe? Because I think that was what was written, that he think that he get the food from the glands or the mana or what you call it, you know?
I don't have any comment on that, but I can just say that their energy can come from EZ, so directly from EZ.
Directly from the EZ?
Absolutely, because it's a battery. You have the EZ negatively charged, and then you have positive charges. But even just the EZ, you've got a lot of negative charges, and they're close to one another. They repel each other. They want to get away from each other, and this is potential energy. And this has the capacity to promote the folding of proteins. And the folding of proteins is what does the work of our body, you see. So there's a direct connection between the two. And since easy water is built by light, by infrared light, there's plenty of energy that's available to do that. And
so we could actually, in the theory, live without food.
We could live without food.
Like it's a shift the gear. We should shift the gear somehow.
Yeah, you might call it a shift of gears to do this without food. And some people, you know, have done it. Not just this guy, but people have been able to come off food. And so one guy wrote a book about this, Life from Light or something. It's a German fellow who decided to do it. He was heavy and sick, and he decided.
And he got free of everything.
Everything, And this is a PhD chemist who is a director. You know, someone you could reasonably respect. And he describes in the book the process of doing it. So the first thing is that everybody thinks that if you have no water for 3 days, you die. But he demonstrated it was not true. That he felt really thirsty after 3 days of no drinking, no food and no drink, cold turkey. So he said he could put some ice cubes on his lips, and that would tend to relieve some of his thirst. But the point that I want to make about that is, he said that it seems to work. There seems to be a spiritual component to it.
Yeah.
And the people who he's known who have done that are spiritually oriented. So it's possible that it works only, I'm not sure, if you have this spiritual orientation. If you don't have it, then it may not work.
Yeah, if you're scared, then I'm sure you could die from it.
Yeah, I mean, so people talk about, what about the people who starved in the Holocaust?
Yeah,
you know, they couldn't. They needed food, otherwise they die. Why did they die? But obviously under stress conditions like that.
Yeah, because if you had the method, and we now could prepare ourselves from this, and know, if you're coming into this situation, you will not die. You just have to do like this and like that. Then I think we can stop some of all this greed and all this fear that is in the world.
The point is that, plants live on, they get their energy from light.
Yeah.
Okay, so you think about what's the process of photosynthesis. Step one in photosynthesis is that light is absorbed and the water is split into H plus and OH minus. Everybody knows that. The process I'm talking about is essentially the same. Light comes and it splits water into. So I think actually what we discovered is a kind of generic first step of photosynthesis. You don't need to have the chlorophyll. There are many other substances that can promote this splitting of water. And it might even be that what we discovered and how the water organizes could actually even apply in the process of photosynthesis, but people who study it have never come to this possible realization. There are many steps in photosynthesis and they're not understood. Many of them are not understood, but the first step is understood, and by the way, it's 100% efficient, which is very nice. So it may be that we actually undergo pretty much the same thing that plants undergo, that there's less of a difference between plants and where they get their energy, and humans where we get our energy. You see, so when Mother Nature created plants and then created animals, so if you were Mother Nature and you say, hey, I'd like to create some animals, and animals have the capacity to forage and look for food, would I throw away this wonderful mechanism that Mother Nature, that I devised, which works so well for plants? Would I discard it completely, or would I use it as an auxiliary or supplementary system? And of course it makes sense. Why throw it away? Let's keep it. You say. So we as humans then,
the plant is inside us. It's just built out.
It's a good way to put it. The plant is inside us. So we do many of the same things that plants do. Your particular interest is sounds. So we did some experiments with sounds, and instead of the experiments that showed something, we did some preliminary experiments with sounds of audio frequencies, and this was a student who was doing it, and it was not done so carefully, and we didn't find anything of note. However, we did another experiment with ultrasound, using transducers that are similar to the transducers that are used for imaging, for ultrasound imaging, and there we found a profound effect.
Yes.
So we haven't published it, mainly because the student left. So what we did is we have a little chamber, and in the chamber is a piece of hydrophilic material and some water and microspheres, the little particles that we use, and we could next to the hydrophilic substance was an exclusion zone, and then it's all enclosed in a chamber, and we put an ultrasound transducer in the chamber. So we turn on the ultrasound transducer, and we found the first thing, which at first disappointed us, we found that the exclusion zone diminished down to about half of the value. We expected it might expand, but actually it diminished. And when we turned off the ultrasound transducer, the exclusion zone built up again, and sometimes built up to 2, 3, 4, even 5 times the original.
So the effect is after?
It's after, And then gradually, after some hours, it came back to where it was.
Oh, so that fits with the sound, because it will work for some time and then it will stop again.
Well, I mean, this was this is pretty interesting.
Very
thought.
interesting.
Yeah, so there is an effect,
Yes.
but the effect is delayed, and I'm really sorry that we didn't publish it because we had enough experiments to actually publish it. If you expose the water to a particular frequency and you build this beautiful pattern, when you apply the same frequency a second time, the pattern shows up more quickly. Yeah, and so there must be some kind of memory because the water must have information that it has received the sound before and has constructed a similar structure and something like that. So there's some information that the water retains, which I think is fascinating. What really surprised me is that the book that I wrote has turned out to be extremely popular. It's called The Fourth Phase of Water. If you look at the Amazon, there are now 150 Amazon reviews. Every time I feel down or depressed, I look through the reviews. Because
So you get happy.
it's a real opera. It's got 4.8 stars of water.
We are building the bridge between science and spirituality. That's the water.
I think so, yeah.
It's a water bridge.
It's a bridge, yeah, you're right. It is a bridge, yeah, as you pointed out, friends, a bridge, colleagues.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, great.